afternoon, everybody. Dr. Misty, thanks so much for joining today. It's Wellness Wednesday, and we're going to talk about a topic that I've been wanting to talk about for a while, and that is your thyroid. So how is your thyroid connected to possible adrenal fatigue, and if this is part of the problem? Just so you guys are aware of what the thyroid and the adrenals are. So this is all part of a system in our body called the endocrine system, okay? So our hormones very much connected to the hypothalamus in our brain, and also our ovaries and adrenals, thyroid. Those are all linked together as part of the endocrine system, okay? So typically with patients with high stress and adrenals, one of the things that I really love to look at with these patients when they come in, patients are typically seeking advice on why they feel so poor and exhausted, okay? And again, I've talked about this a lot, this is usually layers upon layers of issues, but really what we want to examine on a functional level is the endocrine and how the endocrine system is functioning, okay? And if this patient is experiencing an autoimmune attack. So what happens in patients with chronic stress and adrenal issues, right? You've heard me talk about in some of my past videos how chronic stress is very much linked to autoimmune issues, right? It can kick off, especially with trauma, things like that. So one thing to think about is the thyroid in this, because what happens is if you are a carrier for an autoimmune issue, say you have the genetics for autoimmune issues, one of the things that general practitioners are not necessarily looking at is the antibodies of the thyroid versus just the TSH. So what the TSH is, this is a test that most people get on their yearly annual checkup. So your primary care will typically run a metabolic panel, a complete blood count, as well as, they'll look at your cholesterol levels, and they'll also run a TSH. Okay, so the thyroid stimulating hormone is basically your body telling you how much your thyroid hormone is needed, or if your body is converting that. So when you have issues with your thyroid, a lot of things that get missed is there's actually, they're not looking at the thyroid in general. That is the problem. They're not seeing the underlying autoimmune issues that are creating a thyroid problem. Okay, and that's typically what's called Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Okay, so if you have hypo or hyperthyroidism, there are this primary hyperthyroidism, there's secondary. A lot of times this gets missed because you can be a carrier for autoimmune disease, and you can have an underlying or if you have other autoimmune diseases that you actually know about, say you have celiac or MS, things like that. The one thing that is very much overlooked is the thyroid. So typically what I love to do with patients is run an extensive thyroid panel. So we're looking at not only the T3 and T4 total numbers, we're looking at the reverse T3, we're looking at the free T3 and T4. So because I want to look at not necessarily if your thyroid has a disease or not, if your TSH is high and low, and what medication to put you on. I'm really looking at what is your body doing, okay? So if you are somebody who has adrenal fatigue, and this typically shows up in more extensive tests, so saliva tests, we do cortisol testing to test the rhythm of your cortisol throughout the day, and as well as that, there's a couple other tests that I do, but that is the primary one that I do to test for adrenal fatigue. All the time, every single patient that has these chronic problems with exhaustion, it's so important that we do not only test for the adrenals, but also some of the normal stuff, anemia, vitamin D, but I also want to check your autoimmune numbers. So one of the biggest things that I always check for is somebody's ANA markers, so their anti-nuclear antibodies. This is never, ever checked within a primary unless you specifically have an active autoimmune disease, and that's typically after you get referred to a rheumatologist, okay? So if you are seeing a rheumatologist or an endocrinologist because you know you have a specific autoimmune disease and you're showing heavy symptoms, then you will usually get these tested, and you'll get them tested kind of going down the line reactively. So if you get to a point where you're saying you're at a rheumatologist office, that's typically, if you get that referral, that's when people start to understand if they do. Now, here's what I usually hear from people is that what happens when then they're we see your ANA is up, but there's no other markers, there's no other disease markers, so we're really not concerned about it. It could just be a fluke, it's nothing to really worry about, things like that. It's important to understand if you have autoimmune markers that are up, that you could be having an active autoimmune disease that's not showing up in their panel. Okay, so one of the things that shows up when you have to go look for it is thyroid antibodies. So the Hashimoto's is not necessarily hypothyroid. It's an autoimmune disease that's specifically attacking the thyroid gland. So it's kind of secondarily affecting your endocrine system because you're getting an autoimmune attack. So that's really important to understand when patients are coming in and trying to understand their levels of exhaustion. Oftentimes, if they hear from their primary that their TSH is off, if they're experiencing or thinking they might have a thyroid issue, they might try and go and take iodine, right? So that's like a big thing with if you have hypothyroidism. A lot of times physicians will tell you to take iodine because it's what converts to the thyroid hormones, okay? A lot of times iodine will actually aggravate Hashimoto's. Iodine will actually aggravate and amp up those autoimmune antibodies. So this is really important to understand, because if you are somebody who has been trying to, get information naturally and on your own, and you're saying, okay, what is this? What do I have? Do I have adrenal fatigue? Do I have a thyroid issue? Do I have anemia? You've been Googling like crazy, trying to figure it out. You're trying to dabble with all these other types of therapies for yourself. Some of those things could be actually aggravating it, because there could be an underlying autoimmune issue that's attacking the thyroid. So taking things like iodine, even if you have been told, oh, okay, you have a low thyroid, it's so important to look at the anti-thyroglobulin antibodies and the TPO antibodies, because really we need to understand how your body is, what is the root cause of what's going on. That's where I'm all about root cause, right? Getting to the bottom of what's going on. So if you are somebody who, and this is where I say the layers come in, is if I went to my physician and they said my TSH was normal, but yet I have exhaustion, my hair is thinning, I am getting, you may be even getting dry skin, dry scalp, weight gain out of nowhere. So these also mimic adrenal fatigue a little bit, right? So like weight gain, sluggishness, exhaustion, a lot of those also can mimic thyroid, and the adrenals can actually affect the thyroid as well. Because remember, it's one system. They run on a feedback loop. Okay, the thyroid's responsibility is to regulate your metabolism and how you convert energy. Okay, so if you're consistently on this hyperdrive too, and this is something I want you to think about and how this all ties together. If you are somebody who's on this chronic stress loop, right, your body is in this fight or flight state. So your the thyroid's job is to regulate your metabolism and energy conversion, right? So if your body is consistently needing more energy to survive, whether it's because you're exhausted, because your body is amping up those stress hormones and saying, oh, we need more energy, we need more higher glucose, we need more energy conversion, because of how stressed out your body is, the cortisol will actually increase your body's glucose, which is your blood sugar, right? So this all comes into play, and that might be paying your thyroid to also get more energy there. So that could be increasing the stimulation, but there's not necessarily a problem with the thyroid. There's more of a problem with the adrenals, if that makes sense. So we kind of have to look at it as not just like where is the primary issue, but really what in general is happening. in the body, okay? And so if you are somebody where you know, somebody in your family, you have a history of autoimmune disease, and you are somebody who has things like swelling, chronic fatigue, you do have a history of trauma. Trauma really brings out autoimmune, okay? And so knowing that, this is an important thing. So if you have a physician who is willing to go into those numbers with you, I would highly suggest asking if you feel like, okay, I think this is a thyroid issue, things like that. If you're having some of these symptoms, you might be having, again, dry skin, lack of energy, your hair starts thinning or falling out. Those are multiple signs. You're gaining weight out of nowhere. Those are multiple signs of a potential for Hashimoto's, as well as some of the adrenal issues and endocrine. There's nothing that says that when you go after looking for what's wrong or disease that you can't find multitudes of them. And there's always layers of issues that are going on. All right, so I hope this is helpful for you guys. Give me a like if this is helpful for you. Just kind of understanding your body a little more. This is something that's very common and very underlooked. And it's also something that I run on all my patients. So the initial consultation that I do with a lot of my patients is really like the initial dig. Like, okay, let's run through the gauntlet of what is like the systems and the problems that could be creating some of this exhaustion. Because often, again, I've seen patients come in where they are so frustrated and they're like, I feel like something's going on with my thyroid, my adrenals, and usually they have something going on with both as well as an autoimmune. It usually all kind of goes together. And, you know, my TSH is fine. I look at their chart and they'll show me their my chart. And I look at it and it's like, okay, 10 years ago, we look at this and it says your TSH was lower. And then every single year since you gave birth, by the way, I'm going to get to that in a second. Every year since you've given birth, it's interesting. I'm watching this trend where your TSH is just going up and up and up and up. And so it's not in an out of range, but it's creeping up. What could be going on there? Let's check the antibodies to make sure that you don't have Hashimoto's, because oftentimes the autoimmune disease of the thyroid is going to attack the thyroid, and it's going to attack, and it's going to happen slowly. It's going to slowly attack it and slowly attack it. And by the time that your TSH is abnormal, you have already destruction of your thyroid. Okay, and then what happens is you end up on medication to manage the hypothyroid. But really what's going on underneath the surface is that it's not just a hypothyroidism, there's an autoimmune destruction of the thyroid because of everything else. And it's just being missed because you're missing the trend. So one thing I might recommend you guys, if you guys have my chart for yourselves, I would heavily recommend looking at the trends of your TSH, okay, the thyroid stimulating hormone. If you notice that your thyroid is like steadily creeping up, especially after giving birth, this is the kickoff, because a lot of autoimmune conditions can absolutely change after giving birth. This is a big thing I see with Hashimoto's, is that, you know, a patient is like, I was feeling fine, then all of a sudden after giving birth, this started to show up and I just didn't feel right ever since. I haven't felt right. Well, sure enough, we look back and, you know, the patient's TSH is slowly creeping up, but that now we go to look at it and their thyroid antibodies are off the charts. It's like, yes, you do have an issue going on with your thyroid, but it's not the thyroid, it's the autoimmune problems going on underneath. So often when we address the adrenals and try and get the autoimmune aspect under control, that typically you see those numbers go right down. So it's really powerful. That's what, like, root cause medicine is so amazing. And a lot of times the psychology, and this is where I mentioned like a lot of the emotional health aspect, is like you get autoimmune flare-ups just from having like self-sabotage and negative thoughts on self all the time. Like I've experienced this with my celiac and some of my like I have positive markers for some MS markers. I never officially got a diagnosis for it because I know I'm going to treat it the same anyway. But a lot of times when I have, a self-attack or a self-sabotage or something triggers me and I start going into those, self-sabotaging thoughts or self-blaming thoughts or anything like that, I see my symptoms go up. I see like swelling start happening. I see other things start happening with that, and my autoimmune starts to kick in. Okay, it's over time. It's subtle, but there are things that I can tell with my own body that, oh, that wasn't right, or I'll notice like a sudden weight shift, things like that. So just so you're aware, you guys know, you live in your own bodies. You guys know your bodies best. And so if you feel or have an inkling like, hey, something's not right, something doesn't feel right, my body, I feel exhausted all the time. And I know that I'm a parent and I know I'm busy and I have a job, but this is more than that, and your levels of TSH are normal, and you may have even done adrenal testing and those are normal, and you've ruled out vitamin D deficiencies and anemias and things like that. Continue to trust that. Continue to trust that, because there is always a reason. It may not be a disease, it might be a dysfunction, but there's always a reason why you're getting those symptoms. Our bodies are not meant to operate in a state of autoimmunity. They're not. They're not meant to operate in feeling like exhausted all the time. That's not that's not how our bodies were designed to operate. Okay, so continue to trust that. One thing you can do to help yourself, again, look at that TSH. Go back, look at your blood work. If you have some like a My Chart or some sort of electronic health records, go back and look year to year what your numbers were, because they should be in there. And if you start to notice your numbers creeping up, or start to notice any other numbers on there that don't look right and it's pretty consistent, but you've never had that mentioned to you, those are things that you want to be aware of, okay? If you guys want help with this, send me a message or comment below. I'm happy to help you out any way I can. And if you want to do any discovery call or anything to set up something because you have questions about your blood work, I'm happy to do that as well. Just comment below or message me. This is really powerful. You can find out a lot of great things if you look back in trends on your blood work, and just continue to trust yourself. Especially if you've started having issues after giving birth to kids. And again, yes, this gets so swept under the rug. It really does. I'm tired. I've been tired since I having kids. Well, the automatic response is usually like, well, you have kids. Have you been sleeping? They'll go to the obvious things. And it's like, yes, I have been. I've gotten to a point where I've changed my diet. I've gotten more sleep, and my body just still doesn't feel right. Continue to trust that. Continue to trust that. Okay. Thanks so much for watching today. If you found that helpful, please send a comment below. Let me know how that was helpful for you, and any other topics that you guys want to hear about that you might find helpful. Okay. Have a great week.